Good morning. As Jim Doyle is fond of saying, we are all in different places on our faith journey, and wherever you are on your journey this morning, I hope that the music, prayers, rituals, fellowship, and spirit of this place bring you some peace and at least a part of what you're looking for. Mike Slaughter, in his book, Shiny Gods, Finding Freedom from Things That Distract Us, says, "What we do with what we've got makes all the difference in the world. In fact, what we do with what we've got has the power to change the world. True worship calls us to offer our lives, gifts, and resources to God for use beyond our wildest dreams." Those of you who know me know that before my current line of work, I was a theatrical stage manager for a number of years. I moved to California in 1988 and was lucky enough to get my first job a month after that at the La Jolla Playhouse. It was a production of Kaufman and Hart's Once in a Lifetime, and it's a show about people who moved to California to be in the movies. It was rather fitting, I thought, and a fabulous introduction to my new life as a Californian. La Jolla is beautiful. I don't know if you've been there or not, but it's a beautiful place. Clean, safe, and a world apart from the apartment that I was sharing in Koreatown with a friend of mine from college. The director had made a name for himself directing some of the most popular sitcoms of the time, but he'd also graduated from the Yale School of Drama, so he had some legitimate credits as well. Several members of the cast were actors of some notoriety, and during auditions, just getting to meet some of the actors I'd grown up watching in movies and on TV was a thrill for me. The La Jolla Playhouse has company housing for its cast and crews. Most of us came from LA or New York. Those of us from LA had our own cars, but those from New York would carpool, go in together on a rental car and carpool into rehearsals or performances. In my cast, 3 actresses shared a car with an older, well-known character actor. One day, about the 3rd week of rehearsal, the ladies came in looking very concerned and said that someone might want to go check on the actor. He wasn't at their meeting place, and he didn't answer the phone or the door when they knocked. I immediately called the company manager and told him to meet me at the housing with the keys. I left my assistant in charge of rehearsal and took off for the apartment complex. What if he'd had a stroke? What if he'd had a heart attack? I prayed the whole way there that he would be okay. The Playhouse, being a not-for-profit organization, had a very strict policy about verifying you actually had an emergency before you called the fire department. This was the 80s, and there were no cell phones. By the time I got there, the company manager and 2 or 3 other Playhouse employees were standing on the walk leading up to the apartment's door, the actor's apartment door. The company manager came running up to me and said, "Susan, I can't open the door. We've knocked and no one's answered, and I've tried every key, and none of them seem to work." I asked him which key was the key that was supposed to work. He handed it to me and followed me up to the door. I stuck the key in a lock and immediately could feel that it was being held on the other side. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I swallowed and very quietly said the actor's name. A voice, not 4 inches from my face, said, "Yes." I asked him if he was okay, and he said yes. I could see fear in the eyes of the company manager, and we stood there for a moment. Then I heard myself asking if we could come in. Now, if my mother had been there, she would have had a heart attack, but she wasn't, and he said yes, but you alone. I said to God, "All right, it's in your hands," and I walked in. The room was filled with old food wrappers and empty bottles. The furniture was turned over, and there was a sour, stale smell in the air. He was standing there in a t-shirt and boxer shorts with his hand over his mouth. "You see, I've lost my plate." And by that I assumed some kind of dental fixture of some sort. And I can't seem to find it. Again, I heard myself saying, if I were to give you an hour and then send a PA to come pick you up, do you suppose you would have had time to find it? And he said, half an hour. And I said, great, I'll do that, and turned around and left. By the time I got back to rehearsal, he'd called already, and the PA was on her way to get him. When rehearsal was over for the day, the actor came and stood in front of me as I was sitting at the table. I was a little spooked by him, but I tried to smile as I looked up at him. And he said, "Susan, I want you to know that you standing outside my door with such a look of concern on your face was the best Hallmark card I ever received for someone cares, and I promise I will never give you another moment's trouble. Please let me know if there's ever anything I can do for you." As he walked away, I heard the words that I'd stared at in the church railings every Sunday morning as a member of the youth choir singing in the 8:30 service. "I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me." I got it. Stewardship wasn't just about the money. But today is Dedication Sunday, and it is about the money. On the subject of the purpose of wealth, Mike Slaughter says three things. One of the first and foremost purposes of wealth is to serve God's means of provision in our own lives. 2, our wealth is God's means of provision in the lives of those around us. And 3, all of us may not give the same amount of others, but we should provide the same proportion of what we are given. Let's fast forward 10 years to 1998. I'd been able to build a pretty solid reputation and a career in theater. Only as the mid-90s rolled around, there were big cuts in defense spending, and in Southern California, a big part of the funding came from those companies. And as the big defense contracts went, those companies downsized, and as they did, so did the arts. And you had to go further and further afield to find work. By 1994, I was spending, on average, 7 months a year on the road. The AIDS epidemic hit Actors Equity Association's healthcare program really hard, and you had to work 26 weeks in a year before you could get full coverage. Much as I hated to, it was time to grow up and get a real job. In 1996, I got my first job in animation. It was very hard. I had gone from being on the top of my game to not knowing anything. There are many steps to making a movie, and CG animation was still in its early years, and I didn't know anything about animation, much less computer-generated animation. All those years in theater, I'd worked most Sunday mornings, and all the time I'd lived out here, I'd never joined a church. I lived in Hollywood, and in 1998, I started to attend Westwood United Methodist Church. Sharon Rhodes Wickett was the senior pastor, and Jane Voights was the associate pastor at the time. And speaking of different places on your life journey, on your faith journey, I was one of those people who would slip into the back, and I rarely got through an entire service without breaking down, especially when we were singing hymns from my childhood. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but the pastors actually pay attention to who's sitting in their pews. Sharon approached me and told me that it was about time for me to consider joining a church family. I'd always loved my church family in Texas and attended every time I went back there, But like getting a real job, it was time to move on in my faith life as well. I made the decision to join Westwood, and I took the promise of supporting it with my prayers, my attendance, my gifts, and my services very seriously. I made a pledge, and I told God I would give to the church every week. And then I lost my job. The production had shut down and moved out of state. I'd spent 1.5 years on a project that never got out of pre-production, so I still didn't know how to do the job. And now I'd been out of theater for 1.5 years, and all my contacts there had moved on as well. It was the darkest part of my adult life, and the only thing that kept me going was the church. I made the choice to honor that promise to God no matter what. A friend of mine from that period said to me not long ago, "I remember when you could make a feast out of an artichoke." There were several months there where I lived on spiced popcorn and pasta from Trader Joe's. Back then, you could buy a pound of pasta at Trader Joe's for 69 cents. No one knew what my situation was. I'd saved enough money that I could cover my rent, and I'd always been taught to pay for everything in full, so I didn't owe any money. But I kept praying and singing that old camp song, "It's a Happy Day and I Thank God for the Weather," focusing on the lyrics. God did not promise sun without rain, peace without sorrow, life without pain. But he did promise hope for the day, strength for our trials, love all the way. It's a happy day. And at that point in my life, God sent Doug. And for the last 15 years, my life has been on a trajectory that I never would have imagined for myself, and I am so grateful for it every single day. We are in the process right now of cleaning up our studio to prepare for out-of-town family for Thanksgiving. And in the process, I found that statement from 1998. I had to smile when I saw the amount and how sacrificial it felt at this time. I started to throw it away, but then decided I should keep it as a reminder of the fact that everything is temporary and a gift from God. This church is a very special place, and the work that it does is important. There are so many people here who are amazing role models, and I couldn't be happier to have my son growing up as a member of this church family. I am grateful for the gifts of the families and the generation before us who worked to raise money to build this beautiful place of worship. And if you haven't spent time looking around and just look at the glorious windows we have and listen to the music, you should. I'm grateful to the Kennedy family for the gift of that cross. Many times I've sat listening to the music, listening to and looking at that cross and being comforted. I'm grateful for the service of people like Sue Claire Day, Pam Marks, Ermengarde Fry, the Elrods, the Overtons, the Underwoods, Barbara Gorton, Shirley Lohr, and the list goes on of all of the people who work tirelessly for various programs in this church. I'm grateful for the time in fellowship spent at Camp Sky Meadows. I worry that we don't do a very good job of explaining of what all we get when we give to the church. In answer to the question, why do we exist as a church, Mike Slaughter tells us we exist to be the hands and feet of Jesus in order to accomplish God's purpose on earth. He also says, as Christians, we need to remember that people will believe Jesus Christ has risen from the dead not because of our words or fancy talk. They will believe us because of our actions. Thursday, as emails were flying back and forth about this morning's service, I stepped outside my office to ask my assistant a question. He was sitting there reading another of Kaufman and Hart's plays, which I had actually done much earlier in my career at the Dallas Theater Center. This one was called You Can't Take It With You. I get that there are a lot of things out there competing for our time and our money. There are so many worthy organizations out there to support, and we support a lot of them. What is this church experience worth to you? Do you give as much to your place of worship as you do to the cable company each month? Where your heart is, there also is your treasure. What message does your life convey? I know mine is a constant work in progress, and that I'm still trying to get it right.